Millions of Egyptians take part in a two-day presidential election widely expected to sweep former army chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi into office. Exit polls give pro-Western billionaire Petro Poroshenko an outright majority in Ukraine's presidential elections. The separatist leader in Donetsk asks Russia for help as Kiev resumes its so-called anti-terrorist operations in the east. And far-right parties cause a political earthquake after securing a stronger foothold in the European Parliament. Hello there, you're watching AEE World News, and I'm Fatima Bassem. Egyptians headed to the polls to cast their ballots in the first of a two-day presidential election. Former Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is widely expected to defeat his only challenger, leftist politician Hamdin Sabahi. The victory would effectively restore the presidency in the hands of another former military strongman 3 years after Hosni Mubarak's downfall. Our Cairo correspondent Karim Azzuddin has that story.
On the first day of the long-awaited presidential polls, Egyptians in their millions queued outside heavily guarded polling stations to cast their ballots. The election is expected to sweep former Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to power as he faces his only challenger, leftist politician Hamdin Sabahi, who finished third in the last presidential election back in 2012. The election is the 7th vote or referendum since the 2011 uprising, which toppled the country's dictator Hosni Mubarak and the military-backed ouster of Islamist Mohamed Morsi in 2013, raising hopes for greater political freedom. But 3 years on, Egyptians are still hoping for an end to the ongoing political turmoil.
There is a very good participation of the people here. Most of the Egyptian people want a new era, a firm and what you can say intelligent leader who can put everything in its correct pathway. Okay, the participation of the people here, it proves that what happened in the 30th of June last year, it was something dictated by the will of the Egyptian people.
Many other voters hailed the voter turnout.
It's obvious for everybody that today this is Egypt. It's glorious. It's disciplined, it's patriotic, it's everybody is trying in order to participate in his country. So it's a victory. The victory is already done.
While others expressed optimism and praise for the country's security forces.
It's wonderful how Egyptians restored their country after it was taken away. We're proving that the country belongs to its people by voting for a new president who shall rule the country for the next 4 years.
It proves we have a stable country now, as this level of security only exists in a safe country. It's an indication that the nation is returning to its powerful state.
The number of voters is high. Security forces are really discerned when dealing with the voters. This is really well received.
International observers from the European Union, the African Union, and several other international organizations are closely monitoring the vote. More than 400,000 security forces personnel have been deployed to safeguard polling stations across the country. As voting got underway in the earlier hours, one of Egypt's state-run television stations reported a homemade bomb had exploded outside a polling station. The Interior Ministry, however, denied the reports, instead blaming the sound on a car backfiring. On the first day of the long-awaited presidential elections, Egyptians are celebrating the democratic process as they continue to vote in this polling station, which, like many other polling stations across the country, has witnessed the high number of participants. hoping that these elections would bring a better future for the country and its people. Reporting for AEE TV from Cairo, Karim Azzuddin.
The man favoured to win Egypt's presidential elections, former Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi urged Egyptians to cast their ballots, describing the elections as a historic opportunity to have their voices heard.
Today, Egyptians are coming out to write their history and to underline their future. The whole world is watching us. How Egyptians will make history and create the future today and tomorrow. I will not tell the people except that God will hopefully stand by Egypt and help us all. The future will be great. I am telling the Egyptian people that they have to be comfortable that tomorrow will be beautiful and great to all of us. The turnout will be beautiful. Long live Egypt.
For his part, leftist politician and Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's sole competitor, Hamdin Sabahi, praised his young campaigners as he headed to cast his vote in the Egyptian capital.
I'm very proud of the young people in my campaign. I think they are the real heroes. Their role was more important than my own, and what they have contributed is more than I have, and I hope that God will never let them down. I send greetings to our people, and I hope that they come out and give their vote for the country's future.
Let's bring in our Cairo correspondent, Karim Azzuddin. Karim, now you were at the polling stations. How do Egyptians feel about these elections?
Well, the number of participants on the first day of the elections was outstanding, as around 5 to 7 million Egyptians have already voted today out of the 53 registered voters. So the numbers were outstanding, as I already mentioned, and even more voters showed up at the polling stations throughout the last 3 hours of the voting interval. Boxes have been...
Yes,
sorry, carry on.
Is there a sense that Egyptians are voting for stability as opposed to the freedoms promised by the revolution?
Well, the general mood in Egypt at the moment is seems optimistic on the post-election situation in Egypt. However, the people are seeking more stability over the freedom of speech, which is obvious since everyone is looking for a candidate or a new president with a military background who can actually put things in the correct pathway according to them. So the people are not really concerned about the freedom of speech at the moment, as they think that the deteriorating economic situation in Egypt, the deteriorating stability and the safety of the people in Egypt is a result of the two uprisings that took place back in 2011 and 2013.
But don't they fear for what's to come?
Well, they seem really comfortable with the idea of bringing a new president after two uprisings. So I don't think they really fear the future, but I do believe that the majority of Egyptians are optimistic over the post-election situation. The president, someone who can actually put things in the correct way. I'm speaking in terms of economy, security, someone who can bring back the tourism and other aspects of the daily life of Egyptians.
Yes, well, thank you for those updates. That was our Cairo correspondent, Karim Azzuddin. Well, as you heard there, Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood on Sunday said it will boycott those polls, which it described as a farce. The announcement is yet another reminder of the persistent divide left by the overthrow of Islamist leader Mohamed Morsi.
The town of Kardassa, which lies 35 kilometers southwest of the capital, Cairo, stands witness to the division among Egyptians. While portraits of frontrunner Abdel Fattah al-Sisi abound across Egypt, they are absent in this town. Instead, defiant residents have posted pictures of ousted Islamist leader Mohamed Morsi, describing him as the legitimate president. What is more significant in Kardasa is a gutted police building, which stands as a monument to the brutality of the divide. This Muslim Brotherhood stronghold took its place in history on August 14th of last year, when a mob attacked a police station and killed 13 officers, in vengeance to the some 700 pro-Morsi protesters killed in Cairo that day. And though the wound has healed, the scars of the attack did not. Anger was still boiling as Egyptians headed to the polls to elect a new president. On the city's outskirts, there were no festivities or ululating women, in contrast to polling stations elsewhere in the country.
There's already a president, and we know who he is. We have everything. I don't need to bother myself and vote. This is all a farce.
I'm boycotting the elections because it is illegitimate. Everything points that it is a military coup. We will stay on the streets until we restore our legitimacy. The people should fight for their freedom.
Only 3 centers were open to voters, as several dozen men and women lined up to vote.
We support Sisi because he has no particular ideology, only the country's best interest.
However, residents who casted their ballots here were mostly supporters of the ultra-conservative Salafist Noor party, which sided with the military against the Muslim Brotherhood. Many in Egypt want to move on, with a strong man at the helm to restore stability in the most populous Arab country. But not in Kardasa, where run-down buildings stand firm, reminding everyone of the growing split among Egyptians.
Political analyst Omar Ismail spoke to Ali Tijah earlier, and he says that the recent political turmoil in Egypt has led to the people's unwavering faith in the army.
Egyptian voters will probably have a different view, but Sisi would win. It is now a question in how many. It's not a question who's going to win. It's a question in how many votes are going, or how many people are going to be voting for Sisi. The Sisi has popular appeal to the Egyptian, and I think what happened over the past 2 years have pushed the Egyptian people back to the power base, and the power base here is the army. There is no other organized institution in Egypt as organized as the army. The Muslim Brotherhood won the last election because they were the only civil entity that can organize the Egyptian people and bring them out to vote. That is not the case now. It's not a foregone conclusion. I think I would hazard a guess that Sabahi perhaps would get a better showing this time around, and that will give him some legitimacy over and above what happened in 2012 election. It all depends on how the Sisi would, what number he would score in terms of voting. It all depends on also how young people vote. Those who are actually below the poverty line is so high that might create in the future a problem for him if he doesn't achieve what he set out to achieve. There are many challenges, and I don't think his task is going to be easy. Internally, there will be obviously those who will want to see him fail. Abroad, where the Muslim Brotherhood will still be able to gather support from elsewhere in around the world, especially from countries that has Islamic rule.
Exit polls in Ukraine's presidential elections have placed billionaire Petro Poroshenko in the lead, garnering more than 50% of the votes. Poroshenko has already claimed victory, but Kiev is waiting for the final count to officially announce the winner, despite a wave of discontent surging in the east.
Vote counting has begun in Ukraine's presidential elections, but emptying out the ballot boxes and going through the votes, it seems, is only to back what has already been made public, and that is that pro-EU businessman Petro Poroshenko has garnered the majority of the votes. Confident about his win, Poroshenko was quick to take to the podium to claim victory, even before the Central Election Commission announced the results. The Ukrainian billionaire has said that he's willing to negotiate with Moscow to bring an end to the months-long crisis.
Russia is our biggest neighbor, and because of the fact that stopping the war and bringing the peace to the whole Ukraine and bringing stability on the eastern part of Ukraine, that would be impossible without participation of Russian representative. Most probably, the meeting with the Russian leadership will certainly take place in the first half of June.
Although Poroshenko had said he prioritized bringing peace to Ukraine, he also supported the Kiev-ordained military offensive in the east against pro-Russian activists.
Very soon we will see more effectiveness in the anti-terrorist operation. The anti-terrorist operation cannot and will not take 2 or 3 months. It should take hours.
In Kiev, hopes were high on the streets, but analysts had a more realistic outlook.
I am really happy with the result because what I need and what people in this country need is stability and prosperity.
The new constitution does not give the president the same powers as before. He needs the approval of parliament on everything, and he depends on the parliament.
In the eastern parts of the country, particularly Donetsk and Luhansk, which seceded from Kiev after holding a referendum earlier this month, eligible voters slotted garbage in the ballot boxes in a show of discontent.
He is a temporary leader, and this is all temporary, and he will have to leave rather soon, because Tymoshenko is not creating trouble for him. No one is creating trouble for him. The only thing he is having trouble with is eastern Ukraine.
With Poroshenko, who has pledged to keep the government as is, likely emerging as Ukraine's new president, many fear the new authority in Kiev will continue its crackdown against pro-Russian activists who believe the election is not representative of their demands.
The electoral observer mission sent by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe to monitor the Ukrainian elections has praised the voting process and said it met international criteria.
This election proved the democratic spirit of the people of Ukraine, who had the opportunity to express their will at the ballot box and seized it in high numbers. The electoral and security authorities of Ukraine should be commended for their efforts under extraordinary circumstances to facilitate an election that largely upheld democratic commitments.
With a fortune estimated at $1.3 billion, Petro Poroshenko sure enough has the money. But does the chocolate king have what it takes to bring stability to Ukraine? Here's a look at the chocolate mogul's history and previous achievements before campaigning for the country's top job.
Ukrainians have long known Petro Poroshenko as the country's Willy Wonka, or the chocolate king, for his vast confectionery business, estimated to be worth $1.3 billion. However, things are about to change quite dramatically, with Poroshenko looking likely to answer to a different title, President of Ukraine. But aside from his sweet business, the 48-year-old is also a savvy and experienced politician who has held ministerial posts in several of Ukraine's governments over the past 15 years. Poroshenko has been elected to parliament several times and has worked with both the pro-European and pro-Russian political camps in Ukraine. He was one of the founders of ousted President Viktor Yanukovych's Party of Regions. After helping set it up in 2001, however, he left the same year to lead Viktor Yushchenko's Our Ukraine electoral bloc. In 2004-2005, Poroshenko was also one of the main figures of the Orange Revolution. He was then foreign minister under Yulia Tymoshenko's government from 2009 to 2010, and briefly an economic development and trade minister in 2012. After 8 months, Poroshenko then returned to parliament as an independent deputy minister for the central city of Vinnytsia. Although he is believed to have financially supported the Euromaidan protests, Poroshenko did not play a leading role in the demonstrations. Poroshenko also owns 5 Canal TV, the most popular news channel in Ukraine, which showed clear pro-opposition sympathies during the months of political crisis in Kiev. With years of business and political experience, Ukrainians are hoping that the chocolate tycoon turned leading Ukrainian presidential candidate will have what it takes to help the country out of the ongoing political turmoil.
Well, international reactions to those elections in Ukraine have been pouring in. China has welcomed the preliminary results, saying Beijing respects the people's choice.
China respects the choice of the Ukrainian people. We hope that various sides can persevere in dialogue and negotiation and use political means to continue to promote progress in the resolution of Ukraine's crisis. We are willing to work together with the Ukrainian side to promote the development of the friendly and cooperative relations between China and the Ukraine.
The Russian parliament, for its part, expressed skepticism over the impartiality of the Ukrainian presidential elections.
Of course, we can't call these elections absolutely free, democratic, considering the fact that a number of candidates were under pressure, including some threats of physical violence. Therefore, some of the candidates were forced to withdraw from the presidential race.
Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that Moscow is ready for talks with the new Ukrainian authorities. Lavrov made the statement after exit polls showed that billionaire Petro Poroshenko will likely emerge as the country's new president. Russia's top diplomat, however, warned Kiev against continuing its military operations in the east against pro-Russian activists, saying it would be a colossal mistake.
As the President Putin said, we will respect the will of the Ukrainian people. The most important thing for the current authorities is to treat their own citizens with respect. We constantly call for real dialogue between those who hold power in Kiev and all Ukraine's regions. We are convinced that this is key to the resolution of the deepest crisis of the Ukrainian statehood that we have seen.
Well, the leader of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic has called for Russia's help as fighting raged between pro-Russian activists and troops loyal to Kiev. Only hours after the initial results of Ukraine's presidential elections were announced, Kiev's security forces resumed so-called anti-terrorist operations. The latest assault in the east saw the targeting of the Donetsk International Airport.
In connection with the latest developments which are unfolding so fast and so aggressively, we have to appeal to the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, personally and to all of the Russian people. Donetsk and its suburbs in the nearest future may be on the verge of a humanitarian catastrophe. That's why we have to appeal to the entire Russian people to help us in any possible way.
Thick black smoke billowed over the airport complex as the sound of explosions and heavy gunfire rang out. This is the scene in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region as Kiev's security forces attempted to root out self-defense units. Ukrainian fighter jets began bombing the Donetsk International Airport after self-defense forces refused to back down and comply with an ultimatum to surrender. Both sides traded gunfire in and around the vicinity of the airport, which serves areas including Kharkov and Luhansk. According to Kiev, the so-called anti-terrorist operation has so far resulted in 2 people being injured. Earlier in the day, forces belonging to the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic came to the airport demanding that Ukrainian troops leave. As some 200 troops loyal to Kiev were guarding the inner perimeter of the complex, all civilians were forced to evacuate and all flights were halted. Clashes began only hours after early results of the presidential elections were announced, revealing that the billionaire Petro Poroshenko is in the lead. However, it seems Poroshenko's words of refusing to negotiate with armed separatists are already translating on the ground. Many might say a sign that these elections will bring no change to Kiev's current policies.
To discuss more on the situation in Ukraine, let's speak to journalist Manuel Oxenreiter. Now, exit polls reveal that Poroshenko is the winner in Ukraine's presidential elections. Can he bring stability to Ukraine given the fact that he has already refused to negotiate with separatists in the east?
Definitely, he will not bring any stability. He's talking about stability, but what he's doing right now while we are talking here is the contrary. It's the contradiction of that. He is pushing the so-called anti-terror operation against the east of Ukraine. And he is what it is, in fact, is a warfare against his citizens, against the people in that region. So he is pushing those operations we witnessed already within the last weeks. And as he said himself, he wants to finish it as quick as possible. And to finish such an operation as quick as possible, he has to use a maximum of violence. So he brings the contrary of stability.
Yes, and how will he deal with Moscow? Poroshenko already said he wants to rebuild ties with Russia, but at the same time he refuses to recognize Crimea.
Yes, this is a big question. I think that those claims that he wants to talk to Moscow are nothing else than camouflage, because again, he is acting he's acting for the contrary. He doesn't stand for any understanding. He's right now he said he wants to get Crimea back to Ukraine, what would be nothing else than a territorial conflict with Russia. So why should Russia then talk to him when he is showing such an aggression? But we shouldn't forget that Poroshenko is somebody who knew within the last years always to switch the sides. So he was waiting for the right moment to switch from the Yanukovych government to the protest movement. Even before, he was always playing on both sides. So of course he will also try now as president to prolong his time in that office by playing maybe on both sides. So we don't know at the end how he will deal with that. But what we can say is that his acting in Ukraine is contradicting what he says.
Yes, but won't this lead to the same fate as Yanukovych if he plays with both sides, Europe and Moscow?
Sorry,
If he tries to work with both sides, with the European Union and and Russia, won't this lead to the same fate as Yanukovych?
No, it can't anymore, because when Yanukovych was governing the Ukraine was a state itself. The Ukraine stopped to be a state. Ukraine is now a failed entity. We have Crimea, which became a part of Russia. We have the south and the east, which declared themselves independent republics. By the way, these we call today, or Kiev calls today, separatists, used to be just a couple of weeks ago federalists. These people didn't want to split. They wanted to have a federation, but the violence of Kiev made them separatists. They want now to be independent or even to be Russian. So Poroshenko is he acts like the president of Ukraine, but he is, a matter of fact, he's the president of the rest of Ukraine. The rest of Ukraine are the western parts. So this is where he has the power and where he can act and where he can deal like a president. And this western part, of course, is very much pro-European Union. They are watching there. So everything what he will do, the negotiations with the EU, he will not face a lot of protests in Kiev against that. He would face, of course, protests if he would get too close to Russia right now, because this is what the people, especially the protest movement of the Maidan, which is very much Western influenced and financed, doesn't want and wouldn't accept.
Now, how will Moscow deal with Ukraine's new president? Sergei Lavrov also already said that they are ready to hold talks with Kiev.
We shouldn't forget that in the past it was never a problem of Russia and it was never a problem of Moscow and of the Russian government to talk and to negotiate with the people, neither in Ukraine nor in Syria or wherever we have a geopolitical conflict. It was the Russian side which showed itself as cooperative and always prepared to talk. So it's now the same thing. The problem is indeed not Moscow and not Russia. The problem is the West. How far will the Western support for the violent troops, for the mercenaries? We know that there are now US-American mercenaries fighting for the Kiev government. There shall be around, these were even mainstream media in Germany reporting, or in Europe reporting, that there are around 400 US-American fighters. So this is all making not a very easy base for any talk. But it's not the Russian side which will talk. Putin already announced that he would recognize the elected president of Ukraine. There's no problem.
All right, thank you for sharing your thoughts on this, journalist Manuel Oxenreiter. You're watching Ali Tijah World News, still to come. The swearing in of Narendra Modi as India's premier may mark the start of a new era. We'll tell you why after the break. Welcome back to Ali Tijah World News. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Millions of Egyptians take part in a two-day presidential election widely expected to sweep former Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi into office. Exit polls give pro-Western billionaire Petro Poroshenko an outright majority in Ukraine's presidential elections. The separatist leader in Donetsk asks Russia for help as Kiev resumes its so-called anti-terrorist operations in the east. And far-right parties cause a political earthquake after securing a stronger foothold in the European Parliament. France's far-right National Front and Britain's UK Independent Party have caused a Eurosceptic earthquake in EU parliamentary polls, sending shockwaves across Europe and beyond.
The EU Parliament's own projections early on Monday showed the extent of the anti-EU breakthrough, with Eurosceptic parties set to win around 140 seats in the 751-seat Assembly. The most dramatic results came from both sides of the English Channel. In France, the far-right National Front won over 25% of the vote, according to official figures. If confirmed, the National Front's victory in France would be the highest ever national vote garnered by the anti-immigration, anti-EU party led by Marine Le Pen, who has promised to shake up the country as well as the EU. The far-right party easily defeated the centre-right UMP on 20.6% and humbled President François Hollande's Socialists, which came a distant third with just under 14%, with the French Prime Minister Manuel Valls describing the polls as an earthquake. The anti-EU sentiment also swept across Britain, where the UK Independence Party, or UKIP, looks set to score a historic election victory by securing over 27% of the vote, with results from 10 of the 12 British regions declared.
Independence Party.
The UKIP leader, Nigel Farage, hailed the victory as an astonishing precedent in British political history.
The People's Army of UKIP have spoken tonight and delivered just about the most extraordinary result that has been seen in British politics for 100 years, and I'm proud to have led them to that.
In Austria, the right-wing Freedom Party also made big gains, coming in third with 20% of the vote. And even in the EU's most powerful member state, the anti-Euro Alternative for Germany party garnered 6.8% of the vote, putting it above the threshold for seats, just a year after the party was formed. The mood was similar in other parts of Europe. The Danish People's Party was also victorious, while far-right groups had strong showings in Hungary and Greece. Many voters came out to support anti-Euro and anti-immigration parties who had tapped into growing voter frustration with the EU, accusing Brussels of having too much power and not listening to their concerns. The huge gains scored by the anti-EU and radical parties have stoked concern that they could hold Parliament hostage, working against the EU from within. However, analysts say such fears may be overdone. With parties hostile towards the EU making major gains, many are questioning what these results mean for the future of the Union.
Meanwhile, Greece's Syriza party, which emerged triumphant in those EU parliamentary elections, has called for an early national poll to be held. The party's leader also said that the current government lacks the mandate to take any further key economic decisions, especially with regards to debt relief.
This means there is a major disharmony between the public will and the representation in Parliament. We should go to the national elections as soon as possible to restore democratic normality.
A Turkish court has ordered the arrest of 4 former Israeli military chiefs as part of an ongoing criminal trial over the deadly 2010 maritime raid on the Gaza-bound aid ship. In a move that could gravely jeopardize reconciliation efforts between Ankara and Tel Aviv, the Istanbul-based court is set to ask Interpol to issue international arrest warrants for the 4 men, a move that an Israeli official called a ridiculous provocation. The diplomatic row was sparked when 9 Turkish activists were killed after Israeli commandos boarded the Turkish-flagged ship. According to Iraqi officials, Prime Minister Nouri al-Malki's State of Law coalition now holds 112 seats in parliament. The source said that the increase in the number of seats came after various political blocs agreed to join the coalition, indicating their support for Maliki. In the April 30th parliamentary elections, the State of Law bloc won 92 seats in parliament, but fell short of an overall majority, leaving Maliki to court rivals from across the communal spectrum to secure a 3rd term in office. Meanwhile, Iraq's security forces killed 10 ISIL militants in the city of Fallujah and destroyed 3 militant vehicles equipped with heavy machine guns. In this exclusive footage obtained by Al-Ittijah, the Iraqi army also foiled an attack by ISIL militants who were attempting to regain control of the Hayakil region in Anbar province. Security forces apparently killed all of the attackers involved in the operation. This footage also shows the militants detonating an explosive-laden truck in Fallujah. A suicide bomber blew himself up close to an army minibus in the Afghan capital Kabul, killing at least 2 people and injuring 2 others. A defense ministry spokesman said the bomber was on a motorcycle when he detonated the explosives near the army vehicle. Eyewitnesses said that ambulances were taking casualties to a nearby hospital, but the official number of injured is still unknown. The White House has accidentally named its top spy operating in Afghanistan on a memo given out to reporters accompanying US President Barack Obama on his surprise visit to Kabul. The identity of the man dubbed Chief of Station, normally attributed to CIA station chiefs, had been mistakenly added to a list of 15 US officials taking part in a military briefing. The list was then emailed to over 6,000 journalists, including some foreign outlets. The identity of the CIA officer was not disclosed by the media outlet that reported the slip-up for fearing of putting him or his family at risk. In a shocking announcement, Amman has declared the Syrian ambassador to Jordan a persona non grata, demanding that he leave the country within 24 hours over his alleged insults of the Hashemite kingdom. Damascus has responded by declaring that the Jordanian charge d'affaires in Syria is no longer welcome. The move marks the latest diplomatic row between the two countries. The Jordanian monarchy has given refuge to radical militants fighting the Syrian government and supported the ouster of President Bashar al-Assad. Meanwhile, Syrians across the country have held massive rallies to express their support for the government of President Bashar al-Assad and the army, unhindered by continued terrorist attacks across the war-ravaged nation.
With strong and unwavering resolve and undeterred by an escalating wave of terrorist attacks intended to rob them of their joy, Syrians continue to take to the streets and organize activities in daily outpourings of enthusiasm ahead of a presidential vote set for June 3rd. In the capital Damascus, demonstrators carried Syrian flags and chanted slogans in support of the Syrian government and the country's army that has been battling foreign-backed militants for more than 3 years. Demonstrators expressed their support for holding the upcoming presidential elections in the Arab country, with Damascus insisting the vote will go ahead, despite the foreign-backed militancy plaguing the country. Tricolor decorated vehicles are a daily scene now in Damascus as they travel the streets of the ancient city, playing patriotic music through their speakers in a symbolic gesture challenging those who conspired against Syria's national unity. In the coastal province of Tartus, thousands of citizens took to the streets to support the June 3rd presidential election, the government's stances and the army in its fight against terrorism. The participants raised placards expressing their support for President Bashar al-Assad as they chanted pro-army slogans. Many people at the rallies stressed that presidential elections are the only way to guarantee Syria's future, affirming their support to the Syrian army's personnel in countering terrorism imposed by foreign forces on their nation. For many Syrians, the more than 3-year campaign backed by Western leaders to topple Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has essentially failed, with the government now firmly in control of previously contested territory. Running for president yet again, Bashar al-Assad appears to be in better shape than at any point since the crisis began in 2011, and if he manages to secure another term in office, the international community will be forced to reckon with a new reality in Syria, a fate decided by Syrians themselves.
India's Narendra Modi took the oath of office as the country's new Prime Minister. His inauguration was hailed as the start of a new era by his Pakistani counterpart, who called it an opportunity to end decades of regional instability.
Monday marked the start of a new era for India. At the inauguration ceremony attended by regional leaders in the capital, New Delhi, Narendra Modi was sworn in as India's 15th Prime Minister.
I, Narendra Damodar Das Modi, swear in the name of God that I will maintain the integrity of India. I will work without fear, anger or hatred, and will do justice to all as per the codes of the Constitution.
The new Prime Minister promised to forge what he called a strong and inclusive India, telling the public that together they will script a glorious future for their country. 10 days after winning the most powerful mandate in over 30 years, Modi signaled his bold intentions by reportedly cutting a swath through the ranks of government with a radical cabinet revamp. The former T-boy swept to power promising to jolt the country from economic gloom, but still faces a challenge to win over religious minorities suspicious of his intentions. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, as well as Afghan President Hamid Karzai, were among the regional leaders attending the ceremony. Pakistan has been India's nuclear-armed rival for decades, but on this day its premier gave voice to a widespread sense of optimism, calling this a great opportunity for both sides to forge a new era, and that both countries should rid the region of instability and security that has plagued the two countries for decades. The invitation to Sharif was seen as a symbolic olive branch to India's Muslim neighbor, aimed at mending strained ties, and marking the first time that a leader from either country has attended his counterpart's inauguration since independence in 1947.
Thailand's military junta chief has announced that national elections will be organized as soon as possible after receiving a royal endorsement formalizing his status as head of the government.
From an army general to the head of military council, Thailand's military junta has been officially endorsed by the country's king as head of military council that will run the country in a royal command. Dressed in a crisp white military uniform, General Prayuth Chan-o-cha called on the media not to amplify conflicts as he held his first new conference.
The most important thing now is to maintain peace in the country. We will control and take care of those who violate the law, who use weapons, and any protest or anything that will create restive situation.
Prayuth seized power on May 22, claiming the army would restore order after nearly 7 months of sporadic protests. The junta leader added that a council of advisors would be set up, hinting that general elections were on the horizon, but did not give a time frame for the polls.
There must be a prime minister. How it will run without a cabinet? We have the old pattern. We will follow the old pattern. There might be some changes to make it more correct and just. To use power, I have to be careful. The more you have power, the more you need to be humble. I don't have a time frame, but it will depend on the situation. But it will happen as soon as possible.
Despite warnings, crowds of people voicing opposition to the May 22nd coup gathered in Bangkok and other strongholds of the ousted government. Many Thais are not happy with the sudden turn of events, accusing the new military of ruling with a heavy hand by throwing out the constitution, dissolving the Senate and censoring the media, as well as threatening anyone who violates military's rule will be tried in a military court. For the time being, all powers lie with the National Peace and Order Maintaining Council, headed by General Prayuth Chan-o-cha, as the Southeastern Asian country waits anxiously for the events to unfold.
All right, here's a recap of tonight's top stories. Millions of Egyptians take part in a 2-day presidential election, widely expected to sweep former army chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi into office. Exit polls give pro-Western billionaire Petro Poroshenko an outright majority in Ukraine's presidential elections. The separatist leader in Donetsk asks Russia for help as Kiev resumes its so-called anti-terrorist operations in the east. And far-right parties cause a political earthquake after securing a stronger foothold in the European Parliament. Well, that's all from me and the Al News team. Thank you very much for watching and good night.